All right, kiddos, we are going to go over our third history lesson. So this is chapter 3, and it's basically called How Columbus Fared Forth Upon the Sea of Darkness and Came to Pleasant Lands Beyond. So I'm going to go over this chapter with you, okay? At first, the voyage upon which Columbus and his daring companions now set forth lay through seas already known. So that means when they first started out, they knew the oceans that they were traveling over. So that part was not stressful and they knew it. But soon the vast landmark was left behind, and the three little vessels, smaller than river craft of today, were alone upon the trackless waste of waters. So that's important to remember, that those ships were very small compared to the ships that we have nowadays, not even close to the level of the Titanic. And here they are going across the whole entire ocean where the waves are humongous. Sorry, taking a little drink there. Okay, here we go. So they were alone out there. And when the men saw the last trace of land vanish, their hearts sank, and they shed bitter tears, weeping for home and the loved ones they thought never more to see. On and on they sailed, and as day after day no land appeared, the men grew restless. Seeing them thus restless, and lest they should be utterly terrified at being so far from home upon this seemingly endless waste of waters, Columbus determined to keep them from knowing how far they had really gone. So Columbus is starting to see that these men are growing restless, and he's thinking to himself, how can I keep them encouraged? Maybe if I trick them into thinking we haven't been gone quite as long. So what he did was he kept two records. One in which the real length of the ship's daily journey was given, he kept to himself. So he kept the real numbers to himself about how long they've been gone. But there was another ship's daily journey in which the journey was given as much shorter, and that one he showed to the sailors. And he did that because he wanted them to feel like they could do this. Like he was worried that if they really knew how long they'd been gone, that they would get even more restless and worried. A month went past. 6 weeks went past, and still there was no trace of land. Then at length came signs. Snowbirds, which never ventured far to sea, flew around the ships. Now the waves bore to them a rudely carved stick. So they found a stick that was kind of carved in the water. And now the ships plowed a way through masses of floating weeds. And they were like, oh, this is a good sign. We're seeing weeds in the water. All these signs were at first greeted with joy and hope, and the sailors took heart. But as still the days went past and no land appeared, they lost heart again. The fields of weeds, which they had at first greeted with joy, now became an added terror. Would they not be caught in this tangle of weeds, they asked, and never more win a way out of it? To their fearful and superstitious minds, the very breeze which had borne them softly onward became a menace. For if the wind always blew steadily from the east, how was it possible ever to return to Spain? So they're really starting to get worried here because they saw a few signs of land, like birds and a stick and weeds. But then they're not actually seeing the land, and they're starting to get worried because the wind always goes, to the west. And they're like, what if we want to go back to Spain, to the east? How are we going to go against the wind? So Columbus was almost glad when a contrary wind blew. So sometimes when there was a wind going the other way, Columbus was glad because it made the sailors a little more happy to know that they had the chance to go back. And remember, they did have a few ships in those days. Remember how we learned about this before, that could sail against the wind. That was a technology that they had. For it proved to his trembling sailors that one, at least, of their fears was groundless, because they were worried they wouldn't be able to go back. So that was good. But it made little difference. The men were now utterly given over to gloomy terrors. Fear, robbed them of all ambition. Ferdinand and Isabella had promised a large sum of money to the man who should first discover land, but none cared now to win it. All they desired was to turn home once more. They wanted to go back. So they started to have thoughts of mutiny. Fear made them mutinous also. So do you remember what mutiny means? It basically means an open rebellion against authority, like when sailors overthrow their captain. So they whispered together and planned in secret to rid themselves of Columbus. It would be easy, they thought, to throw him overboard some dark night, and then give out that he had fallen into the sea by accident. Okay, so do you get what's happening? They want to throw Columbus overboard, and they just want to say if they ever get caught or anything, they'll say, "Oh, he just fell in by accident." No one would know. No one in Spain would care, for Columbus was, after all, but a foreigner and an upstart. The great ocean would keep the secret. They would be free to turn homeward. Columbus saw their dark looks. He heard the murmurs of the crews and did his best to hearten them again. So he's trying to encourage them because he knows what they're planning. He spoke to them cheerfully, persuading and encouraging, laughing at them while in his heart he wept. So he would be happy and cheerful with them, but inside he was really sad because his crew wanted to kill him. Still, the men went sullenly about their work, but at length one morning a sudden cry from the Pinta. Remember, this was one of the ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. The Pinta shook them from their sullen thoughts. It was the captain of the Pinta who shouted, "Land, land, my lord!" He cried, "I claim the reward." And when Columbus heard that shout, his heart was filled with joy and thankfulness, and baring his head, he sank upon his knees, giving praise to God. The crew followed his example. Then their hearts suddenly light and joyous, they swarmed up the masts and into the rigging to feast their eyes upon the goodly sight. All day they sailed onward toward the promised land. The sun sank, and still all night the ships sped on their joyous way. But when morning dawned, the land seemed no nearer than before. It seems like they can barely see it, but they're not getting any closer to it. Hope died away again, and sorrowfully as the day went on, the woeful truth that the fancied land had been just a bank of clouds was forced upon Columbus. Oh no, so they thought they saw land, but it wasn't land, it was just clouds. Again, for days the ships sailed on, and as still no land appeared, the men began to murmur. Then one day, when Columbus walked on deck, he was met not merely with sullen looks, but with angry looks. The men clamored to return, and if the admiral refused, why, so much the worse for him. They would endure no longer. So one day, after they had that false alarm of land, Columbus gets up and he looks at his crew, and they're not happy anymore. They're not just restless. They are angry. And they're like, "We want to go back now. And if you say no, we will throw you overboard." So what did Columbus do? Let's find out. Bravely, the admiral faced the mutineers. He talked to them cheerfully. He reminded them of what honor and gain would be theirs when they returned home, having found the new way to India, of what wealth they might win by trading. Then he ended sternly. "Complain how you may," he said. "I have to go to the Indies, and I will go on till I find them, so help me God." For the time being, the admiral's stern, brave words cowed the mutineers. So it did help that he said that for a little while at least. But not for much longer. Columbus knew right well would they obey him if land did not soon appear. And in his heart he prayed God that it might not be long delayed. The next night Columbus stood alone upon the poop of the Santa Maria. Now, I read this line, you guys, and I was like, what is the poop of a boat? or a ship, because it literally says poop in the book, and I have no idea what that means. But it actually is a shipping term, like a term. And it's at the back of the ship, and it's the uppermost back end of the stern. And it's called the poop deck, and it's where the ship's wheel was located. So there really is something called a poop deck, P-O-O-P. And I thought that is such a weird name, but it's really the stern of a ship, the very back part of it. And it's called poop, P-O-O-P. So I'm going to make that one of your questions because it's just so interesting. Okay. So the next night, Columbus stood alone upon the poop of the Santa Maria. Full of anxious thoughts, he gazed out into the darkness. Then, suddenly, it seemed to him that far in the distance he saw a glimmering light appear and disappear once and again. It was as if someone walking carried a light. But he was so scared because he didn't want it to be another false alarm. But so fearful was Columbus lest his fervent hopes had caused him to imagine this light that he would not trust his own eyes alone. So he called to one of his officers and asked him if he saw any light. "Yes," replied the officer, "I see a light." Then Columbus called a second man. He could not at first see the light, and in any case neither of them thought much of it. Columbus, however, made sure that land was close, and, calling the men about him, he bade them keep a sharp lookout, promising a silken doublet to the man who should first see land. So, till 2:00 in the morning, the ships held on their way. Then, from the Pinta, there came again a joyful shout of, "Land! Land!" This time it was no vision. It was land, indeed. And at last the long-looked-for goal was reached. The land proved to be an island covered with beautiful trees. And as they neared the shore, the men saw naked savages. They were probably like Native Americans. And they were naked, crowding to the beach. Okay, I'm going to get to that. There we go. In awed wonder, these savages watched the huge white birds as the ships with their great sails seemed to them. What do you think? What do you guys think that the Native Americans they really they didn't voyage across the sea like these people. They didn't look like these people. They had never seen people like this. So it is interesting to think about, what do you think they thought when they saw Columbus arrive with all of their fancy clothes and fancy boats and everything? Anyway, it seems like they thought they were big white birds. And nearer they came, and when they reached the shore, they folded their wings. The natives fled in terror to the shelter of the forest. They were scared. But seeing that they were not pursued, that means they ran to the forest, but then they're like, well, no one's chasing us. Let's go back. Their curiosity got the better of their fear, and returning again, they stood in silent astonishment to watch the Spaniards land. First of all came Columbus. Over his glittering steel armor, he wore a rich cloak of scarlet. So he wore like a reddish cloak over his armor. Then, each at the head of his own ship's crew, came the captains of the Pinta and the Nina, each carrying in his hand a white banner with a green cross. You can barely see the green crosses there, but I can kind of see them on those folded flags. Sorry, I keep messing that up. And the crowned initials of the king and queen, which was the special banner devised for the great adventure. I can see the F and looks like a Y for Isabella. Maybe it starts with the Y. Okay, so each man was dressed in his best, and the gay-colored clothes and the shining armor and the fluttering banners made a gorgeous pageant. Upon it the sun shone in splendor, and the blue sky was reflected in a bluer sea, while scarlet flamingos, startled at the approach of the white men, rose in brilliant flight. So it's really painting this picture of like they're arriving, and it's so inspiring and beautiful the way that they arrived. As Columbus landed, he fell upon his knees and kissed the ground, and with tears of joy running down his cheeks, he gave thanks to God, the whole company following his example. Then, rising again to his feet, Columbus drew his sword and solemnly took possession of the island in the name of Ferdinand and Isabella. Okay, we're going to stop there. That's an exciting place to stop, where Columbus is first arriving on this island. And I'll tell you next time which island it was. Okay.